All right, welcome everyone again to another Biocentrica Presents. We're doing Fellowship Week here in 2025. Today we've got Vader with us. He was a former clinical development fellow. Vader, please take it away.
Yeah, so I wanted to thank Penny for having me today. Just want to take some time to talk a little bit about what my journey was like as a pharmacy student, then going into a fellow, and then now being an FTE. So we're going to kick things off with just kind of setting some housekeeping/ground rules. So everyone, please make sure your mic is muted, but I don't know if that's necessarily an option here. Like maybe you all are muted, I can't tell. But we ask that you hold your questions for the end of the Q&A session and that you just kind of put them in the chat and we'll get to them at the end. And then if you want to ask your question verbally, we ask that you raise your hand as well and we'll get to it in a timely fashion. This session is supposed to be a professional environment, so just ask that you try and remain respectful of everyone here. But we're also not going to take things too seriously, I should say, either. But disruptive, offensive, or unprofessional behavior won't be tolerated at all. And you might be removed if you fail to adhere to this. And with that being said, let's move on to my background. So I am a PharmD, much like I assume that everyone else here in this chat is, and I went to a 6-year program. On a more personal level, I'm from the Midwest, so I just kind of went to the schools that were in the surrounding area and that really had like a good reputation, so I stuck around that area for training. In terms of work experience, I think that a lot of us, at least in pharmacy, understand that I was just a regular retail intern. I did that gig for about 2 to 3 years and then had a few different industry course electives at my school, some more focused on showing students like what the drug development process was. I also had some involvement in IPHO and their VIP case competition, and your mileage may vary with that in terms of what you get out of it, but it was still experience nonetheless. And then I also had some industry appies at a large pharma company during my P4 year. Spent a lot of time in kind of a mixed role of kind of reg, kind of CMC, kind of portfolio management. So got to see a lot, not necessarily got to do a lot though, because still a student at the end of the day. And then additionally to that, I had a boutique commercial internship position for a couple of months, mainly just kind of doing some competitive analysis and then some student research along the way. So when I think about like why I wanted to be in industry, I knew about myself that I tend to get a little bit bored thinking of going into the pharmacy like every day for like the next 30 years. I remember being like very turned off by that idea, like as a student. And so I was trying to find something that really let me explore like a lot of different diverse applications. And I've always kind of been drawn to science, and so clinical development kind of was in my wheelhouse, but I knew industry in general was probably the right path. And so with that being said, I also appreciated the ability of being able to move between a lot of different functional areas that industry has. Like a lot of people throughout their career are able to switch from clin development, medical affairs, or flip-flop between the two, or even go into commercial or other functions as well. And that was something that also seemed like a plus for me in case I ever got bored. But initially, I stuck with clinical development just because I always really thought that the science of things was really cool. That learning about the mechanisms of action was probably the most interesting part of any therapeutics class that I had. And so that's why I stuck with development. And now we're going to go into our fellowship planning. Oh, God. Where are we at? All right. So, fellowship planning. So, what I did, both from help from academic mentors and then people that I met through Discord and scenarios like this, I learned that tailoring my resume for like relevant coursework, research experience, and transferable skills was something that was really important for fellowships. A lot of the times, and also depending on the program, not every person knows what's going on with your CV. or even what everything means. So even calling things like APPEs or IPPEs and things like that, they don't really mean anything to a lot of people. So something that I really took away from like the resume and CV preparation was making sure that the relevant things were really at the top of the CV, and that a lot of the information was really in layman's terms, that anyone could read it in like a fraction of a second and get a general idea for what I did. Additionally, letters of intent slash recommendation. This, since I had some work experience and some experience as like a student researcher, it didn't really have an issue with finding somebody that was willing to write a positive letter for me.
Hey,
But it's
Vader.
also important. Yeah.
I'm sorry to cut you off. I think it's stuck on an incorrect slide. We're seeing the star slide.
Oh, that's this.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry to interrupt. Please
No,
continue.
yeah, no, yeah. Yeah. But yeah. Shoot, where was I? Where was I? Cha. Letters of recommendation. Yeah. So, by and large, as long as you weren't like moss on a log or just somebody that just showed up to school and didn't do anything else, um, it's pretty easy to get like a positive letter of recommendation from faculty or a boss. But it's really important that you make sure that it's somebody that can write a positive letter of recommendation. You don't want somebody writing like a negative or kind of a milquetoast recommendation either. But then again, the letter of recommendation is probably one of the least important things depending on the program. Some programs, it can be the make or break between like two really good candidates. But by and large, like these are just kind of skimmed by the fellows for the most part. Next, just want to talk about like targeting strategy for like specific roles. So for me, something that was really important was finding companies that had like a really strong development pipeline. So thinking about companies that really put like a big investment in R&D and weren't just like one molecule or one kind of therapeutic area companies, and things that could really like give me a lot of different experiences where I'd get to see a lot and not necessarily become so specialized right at the beginning. And that kind of helped inform my search for specific roles. But it's also something that you can think about too for other roles. If you know that you want to be focused on one specific area of med affairs or reg affairs, find what those programs are that are very hyper specific. Or if you don't really know, shop around for the ones that will give you a lot of different rotations. And then just kind of narrowing down the selection as well. Once you kind of know what you like, it makes it a lot easier to kind of axe those programs that aren't really that interesting for you. So it's just really kind of knowing what your preferences are and then making a handleable list from there. For myself speaking, I applied to probably, I don't know, between 10 or 15 programs for fellowships. And if I could go back in time, I would probably advise myself to choose a bit more. Originally, I planned to only submit to 10 programs, but that was before the whole COVID and virtual interview process where everything was done in person. And now that it's a lot more open, definitely you should apply to like as many programs as you can just to optimize your chances for actually getting something. And then thinking about things like interview practice, I was very fortunate. I had a lot of great people that suffered through a lot of bad interviews with me, and they told me where I sucked and where I could improve. They told me what resources as well to go to and kind of look at. The advice that I would say is that just kind of go to LinkedIn or like any other Google form and try and figure out like what those resources are for like star behavioral questions. So find out the type of questions that people ask. And then you can also look at sort of what those responses are that show like a good answer to that question, and then go back and kind of tailor what your stories are, and what those things are towards those actual questions. So when you do that, you get a better understanding of how to answer specific questions, because maybe in the heat of the moment, you won't really understand what the question's assessing. But when you understand the question and then you understand the response, I think it's a lot easier for you as a candidate to be able to talk about your experiences that way. And additionally, you shouldn't try and memorize the answer to every single question, because that'll be a great way for you to just put your foot in your mouth in the middle of an interview because you kind of pulled the wrong story that you were thinking of. Instead, you should kind of think of what your experiences and stories are as kind of Legos or building blocks into answering what that actual question is and developing that narrative kind of on the fly. Because once you already know what you already kind of know what your building blocks are of your story, and you understand what the question that they're asking, you can kind of build your answer there, and it comes across a lot more authentic versus like reading off of a screen or like rehearsing, because that comes through too when you just kind of seem a bit robotic as well. And some of the resources I utilize, once again, things like LinkedIn, they have some questionnaires that you can look at that talk about the different type of interview questions. They also have like mock interview examples, tips like that. Um, yeah, and I would say that's kind of all I did in terms of application preparation and utilizing resources. So then talking a little bit more about the logistics. So in person versus virtual. For myself, and I think for most other fellows outside of COVID, it's been a mix of virtual and in person, mainly virtual for those first and second and third round interviews, and then in person interviews for like the on sites or the receptions or things like that. And I think that that's probably going to stay the way for a while because it's expensive to fly people out for on sites for the most part, unless you're like a few select programs that still do a lot of things in person. You're going to have a mix of that as well. In terms of physical or virtual media, um, it really kind of depends on the program. So for myself, I didn't really have like a presentation that I had to make for my interviews. Some programs do have that. And my advice there is when you're given those presentations or you're asked to make presentations, think about who you're presenting to. So if they give you the opportunity to present on something, do not under by any means present on something that that team specifically has a hand in, or is necessarily related to the company, because odds are they probably know way more than you and will be able to point out where you have a flaw. In which case, you're going to feel really under pressure in the moment if they have a question that you hadn't considered. So yeah, I would advise you to kind of pick a topic that's adjacent to what their interest is and relevant as well. Um, and I would say I only really had to prepare like physical copies of my CV and resume to have on hand. Um, and even then, like they've already seen it by the time they've seen you in person, so they probably won't even need it. Rounds of interviews really kind of depend on the company that you're at. So for myself, 3 to 4 rounds of interviews. In my program specifically as a fellow, we changed the interview structure somewhat. So um, it can always kind of change, I would say, depending on what program you apply for. It's just good to kind of touch in with the current fellows to understand what the process is, maybe ahead of time. But I wouldn't get too aggressive with like the questions. I would say if you have the opportunity to interview or just like talk with them casually before the fellowship process, because that would get a little annoying, I would imagine. Receptions. So I did have 2 receptions. So there's a company specific one, and then there's also a program specific fellowship. And I would say that that's probably going to be pretty standard for most fellowships going forward. Um, if you luck out and don't have to go to the fellowship reception and like at like mid-year, it's great because it kind of saves you a plane ticket if you already know like that you're the fellow that they're going to pick. But I will say that depending on your program and depending on the company, they do want to see you there. I understand that it's a big ask in terms of capital. You're spending like 2 to 5 grand sometimes to go to these receptions and go to these conferences for the fellowship process, but it's just kind of a chance that you have to take on yourself if you kind of want it. I don't know if programs are going to continue to do that in the future, but it's definitely something to consider now if you want to save up money or take out additional loans as well. And some things that were communicated to me that were unique about my company, things that were great, like good retention, a great title upon leaving or being retained by the program, um, and then being able to be like a contributing high value member of the team. And that's really what helped me pick this company for my program. So, going a little bit more into our fellowship structure and the structure overview. So, duration, both of my company and other companies, kind of depends. Some programs are 1 year, but by and large, they're mostly 2 year programs. Typically, 1 years are things that we see like maybe some MSL programs, but mainly like med information and things like that. You can have different rotational systems. So non-rotational in my experience, but other programs do have rotations that are either fully fleshed out or you get to like have an input on and make a decision in terms of what your actual interests are. Departmental integration. So our focus was really in one single department or functional area. There wasn't like a cross-functional rotation opportunity. Um, And I mean, I think that that kind of it depends, I think, in how valuable that is for you. I think that if you're someone that gets kind of into a fellowship where you're not really sure uh, that this is the right fit for you, maybe having that out of like maybe a 6 month block or an 8 month block where you're working in something that's not related to your initial cross functional area, maybe that's a good fit for you. But for me, I knew that I really wanted to stay within my focus area. And then for mentorship, we had guidance from a couple different people. So we had previous fellows that had went through the program that we could talk to, and he had his like onboarding buddies. Excuse me. And we also had some we had um, mentors as well, like within our functional area as well, and then we had directors as well. But outside of that, we were really encouraged to like talk to other people within our group, not specifically within the fellowship program, but within the functional area too, just to get a better understanding of what the hell's going on. Because in clinical development and a lot of other functional areas, it's way more than you really think it is. Going in from being in pharmacy school and having limited industry experience. Excuse me. And so the more you understand about what's going on with and that really helps you get a better understanding of the big picture and how the team should work. Additionally, we had a lot of opportunities for networking and professional development. I would say more so it was the company that had the networking opportunities. There were different things like coffees that we could go and grab with other team members. There were, I would say, probably quarterly or bi-quarterly maybe networking events where they talk about the different research that's going on in some of the different groups. And then also just socials as well, which was pretty nice and helped you make some new friends wherever you went. Our mentorship approach was really kind of fostering independence, with our mentor saying that everyone that they bring into the group is pretty qualified and pretty motivated, so they want to continue to help us continue to be, I would say, pretty independent and kind of guide us more than teach us. And so anytime that we would run into a problem or we had issues, like the expectation was we could always go to our mentor and kind of maybe flesh things out and get a better idea of an approach. But by and large, like we had our workflows and we were on top of them. Goals and outcomes. So our program goal is just creating good clinical scientists throughout the duration of the 2 year program. And within the second year, really owning more responsibilities as things went on. Well, the first year was, I would say, mainly more just for like learning and getting up to speed and kind of getting team member buy-in in terms of your competence. And then full-time career preparedness. Yeah, I would say that the program really focuses on maybe if you aren't fully set on being a clinical scientist, I would say the mentors were pretty focused and interested in having you like find something within industry and helping you find something externally or even internally as well if there's a good fit. And I would say some like skill development that we had were things like safety data evaluation, document authoring, some cross-functional leadership, and timeline management as well were some things that we were able to do during our time in the program. So moving on to onboarding, it took legitimately 6 months between start date one to actually feel comfortable with like what was going on around me. Just because there's going to be a lot of acronyms that are thrown your way, a lot of trainings that you're going to have to do that don't really mean anything to you at the time, and understanding names, understanding functions, understanding org charts and things like that. And that just kind of takes time. Maybe you'll adapt to it a little earlier than 6 months, but I would say you shouldn't feel that you're behind at all, like as a fellow, or if you're 6 months in and you're just like finally just starting to understand how the pieces start to connect. Um, and within the first 3 months, you're going to spend a lot of time taking minutes for your meetings because nobody in industry likes taking minutes. And since you're the new guy in, that's going to be your job. Additionally, you're going to be doing a lot of compliance training and thinking about recruitment for the next cycle. So if you think about it, you're going to start probably first week of July. Towards August and September, that's when you start doing your webinars and stuff. And then boom, October, you're right back into recruitment cycle. And I think that this is pretty good because you're really doing a lot of this like other stuff where you're doing minutes compliance training that's a little boring, but you get to show your competence and planning for the next recruitment cycle and stuff. Um, so, I mean, it's not the most fun in the world, but I think that it's fine. And I don't know if there's necessarily a better way to do it. Um, and then additionally, doing some things like personally, I had some patient insight work where I was kind of taking what was done for a very specific disease state and kind of understanding how that could translate back into our approach into doing clinical studies in that disease state. So that was something additionally that I worked on. And something that really changed my perception during my time in the role is just like being a clinical scientist isn't so much about knowing everything, but knowing the best way to tackle problems and knowing who to go to within the confines of the organization and how to communicate information correctly. Because as a clinical scientist, you are the line function responsible for that study. And so anytime that there's an issue or anytime somebody doesn't know anything, they're going to go to you. And you're going to get really behind really quickly if your thought is, I need to handle all of this by myself now. And you're going to really succeed if you can realize, okay, who knows what, who owns that task, and who needs to be either told slash empowered to lead fixing that task. And so that's something that I think that would really benefit you if maybe you think that it's going to be like you're going to be really in the weeds in the science. It's likely not going to be like that. A lot of it is just kind of the people relations and knowing how to divvy up the work and making sure that things progress smooth. And some things that I learned in adapting to the fellowship role is learning to be a lot more vocal about issues with projects and understanding stakeholders. I think one of this is typically as like as a person, like if there's a problem with something, I want to figure it out first before I like go and ask for help for something. Just because I like to be pretty independent, and I don't like seeming like I don't know anything. But at some points, and depending on what the severity of the task, it's more important to just like raise concerns immediately as they come up, just because it's not so much a reflection of like you, but like there are many other line functions that will be affected by information as it pops up too. And so being really vocal about issues and staying on top of communication is definitely something that I adjusted to in the role. And then we have our week in the life. And I'll say that the if you've talked to anybody in industry, they'll say that your average week, your average day, like who knows what it looks like. And that being said, is a lot of it is it's project based work, so it's not like being a pharmacist where we clock in and we do the same thing for 8 hours. It really depends on the needs of the project. But I would say genuinely in the week of life, I'd spend mm, 30 minutes to maybe an hour every week or every 2 weeks, just talking with my manager, talking about things I'm working on, things I'm learning. Um, Additionally, just doing a lot of like data analysis, looking at safety labs and things like that. You're going to spend a lot of time in things like Excel or other programs as well, just kind of looking at the clinical data, looking at what doesn't make sense, looking at the EDC, looking at doesn't make sense, and then raising queries. And queries just being like, what is this? What does this mean? Does this look normal? And talking with the site. You're going to spend a lot of time in meetings with a lot of different team members and stakeholders, sometimes more time than you ever thought you could actually just sit down at your desk. And yeah, so you're going to be doing that, and then spending a lot of time just catching up on emails, making sure people are looped in when they need to, and then always just like, I would say like once every 2 to 3 days, I would just look through all of my sticky notes that I had on things that I had to do and make sure that I had actually sent an email to somebody about it, just because depending on what you're doing. Hello? Okay. Depending on what you're doing, you can lose track of some things pretty easily, I would say. So it's always just a good habit to make sure that your communication's there. And then just some cool things that I got to do. So I would say some personal impacts and projects that I had were working on some adaptive studies. And this was something that happened more in my second year of fellowship. I got to work on a pretty big adaptive study for my company um, that was looking at a lot of different interventions in a specific disease state. And it really helped me understand, past like our basic double-blind placebo-controlled trials, just how difficult and complex the actual like operational piece is for some of these studies, and how important communication is across teams, especially when it comes to things like blinding and unblinding as well, because that can be a really big issue in terms of compliance. Moving forward from that, some stuff like independent safety review. There were times on my studies where I think I was the only person that was looking at some of the safety data that was coming through. In one of our platforms, I noticed that our vendor was not doing what they had actually said they would. And it wasn't just affecting our study, but it was affecting multiple studies within our company. And so I was able to raise that to our team, which gave me a little bit of street cred. That said, Vader is really good at getting into the data. He's got an eye to detail, and if you have something that needs to be done in Excel, send it to his way. And that ended up being like a gift and a curse at the same time. And then also I got to lead a protocol amendment, which was really good because early on it really helped me learn how to manage stakeholders and driving like a project towards a goal completion. Um, which is I think a good thing to have, because if you start off in this role, especially if you're within your early to mid 20s, it's not very common, and so you're going to be dealing with a lot of people that have been working in the role in their roles for a lot longer than you, and knowing how to lead without authority, or like lead with like influence, like that matters a lot, and you're going to have to figure out the best way that that works for you and your team members too. And I would say that that was a really good experience for me. So once again, just kind of talking about the skills that I built. So cross-functional leadership, being able to review safety data, doing presentations to both internal and external stakeholders. Some of that for the fellowship program, some of that for uh, my actual company. Getting really good at Microsoft Excel and the rest of the Office suite. Writing clinical documents, and then doing some work in CRO selection and management as well. And then moving on to networking. So I networked through company events, fellowship events, conferences, and just saying hi to random people in our office. And I think it's important because you need to understand what the different roles are slash paths that people have within industry. It amazed me. One of the guys that was in our office previously, before he got in his role, he worked as a shoe salesman. And so it's always just super interesting to hear all the different experiences that people bring with them, and then kind of what those experiences how they kind of play out or like what their value is too. And it also helps you find mentors too, which is pretty important. And your overarching goal, I think, should be like as a fellow, like one is establishing yourself as like a knowledgeable professional, contributing to discussions, and then like communicating your value to other people to make them want to get to know more about you, I would say. And then to make those relationships less like worky and but more like personable so that they actually kind of like you as a person. And if there's like a role that comes up in the future, they think, oh, Vader or oh, Christine or oh, whoever, they're a great fit for the role. So challenges and lessons learned. I would say that some challenges that I had in my program were I think that all of you will kind of have if you're in clinical development is just kind of navigating the organization structure and understanding the stakeholder perspectives and understanding what each different person on the team needs from every other person and how that kind of meshes together into like actually accomplishing goals. I think that I really learned a lot in this role. I became a stronger communicator, a better collaborator as well. And, as pharmacy students, we think that our time management is okay. I'll tell you as a fellow, if you're actually working and if you're actually busy, you're going to get better at it and you're going to know what things work for you and what things don't. Um, and I would say that I learned more on the project management side as a fellow than on the scientific side, which I initially thought that I would be doing. But project management is a pretty good skill to have, especially in clinical development. You can do different work, but with the same people or very similarly aligned people, I would say. And it's a good skill to have either way. The science pieces of clinical studies, I would say, typically kind of rein in towards the earlier phases of the study, and project management really kicks up once you start doing things like selecting your vendor that's going to do your specific task for the study, and then making sure that you hit timelines in terms of trial recruitment and things like that. um, and then once again, kind of coming back to that leading without authority piece, figuring out how to get people to do what you want as a fellow is going to be a challenge for the most part. And it really have to kind of sell that you're kind of helping, that they're kind of helping you, and you're really all kind of working towards the same goal, because sometimes you're going to get team members that are really resistant to having somebody in their mid to early 20s tell them what to do and why they why they might need to work a little bit harder, things like that. And then some key takeaways. Um, just really kind of valuing the experience of being in a fellowship. Sometimes it can be difficult for any number of reasons, but you should really always remember that you're in like a 1 in a million spot where a lot of people applied to be at, and a lot of people didn't get in. And you should really try and maximize the value that they get out of the time there. And you should always just try and make the best of the situation, even if things aren't necessarily the best. Also, just want to state that fellowship entry isn't even a requirement. Like the vast majority of PharmDs and people that got into industry didn't do a fellowship. They either worked in an adjacent industry and kind of just kept applying and not knowing anyone else, or they had people that already worked internally that were able to help coach them or help advise them on how to like talk through interviews, like get meaningful and translatable experiences, and they got in that way. So it's not an end all be all that you need a fellowship to get into industry. And I would say that there are a lot of people that are doing great that aren't that never did a fellowship, and they're probably a couple years ahead than people that did them. But it's definitely, being in a fellowship is the safest option, I think, to getting into industry and getting some experience. And I would also say that, for me, it just really helped continue that I wanted to stay in the clinical development space, which is what I kind of saw myself being in pharmacy school, and that I always want to kind of remained involved with students, likely through mentorship or recruiting through other means as well, just because I appreciate being able to give back. A lot of people helped me get my fellowship and also advised me during the time of my fellowship. So I always like the idea of being able to pay things forward. And just some last advice: plan early. So it is now. It will be August in like 5 hours. So start thinking about what you need to get done. You need to get your CVs ready. You need to get your letter of intents ready. You need to think about who your letter of recommendation writers are. You need to think about what programs you're interested in. What do you want to do? And I don't mean to stress you guys out about that, but I mean you eat an elephant a bite at a time. So you got to like start planning now, because you don't want to be in mid October and be like, all right, great. I think I want to do reg or commercial. You're going to be in a rough spot because those are two very different functional areas with very different workflows. And if anyone ever asked you what you applied to and you said that, that's going to likely be a big red X, because it's going to come across that, well, this person has two very different roles highlighted as what their interests are, and they don't seem to know a lot about either. So really spend some time focusing on what you want to do, what your story is for interviews, and then being authentic and making sure that your story kind of aligns with that. And also stay open-minded regarding future opportunities too. You might not get a fellowship, and that's completely fine. There are other fellowships that open up in the spring cycle, some in the summer. But I mean, there are agency jobs, things like that. People go through residencies and get into like MSL positions too. So it's not like an end all be all that you need to nail a fellowship in your P4 year, or your life is over. Like, you just kind of have to stay persistent. And that ends my presentation. And if we have questions, I'd love to hear them.
Vader, thank you so much. That was really an excellent presentation, and I think it was very thorough. Super interesting to get a great inside perspective on what an early clinical development fellowship looks like, and thank you so much again for the advice as well. I'll open the floor up to everyone. We have our first question. Did you ever want to rotate with a different function?
No, I never did. Mainly because I think in the first 6 months, I was trying to learn what even was going on in clinical development. Um, and once 6 months passed and a year passed, I was like, I like this. I want to stick with it. Um, I never really wanted to switch into something else. Now, that's completely different from saying, have I ever had an interest in the other functional areas? Which is yes. I probably talked to either Penny or Timo in here, or actually not. Maybe Timo's not the best example, but I tend to talk to a lot of other people about what their functions are, questions that I have about it too. So I mean, you can definitely have a have a fellowship in one specific therapeutic area, and then like have interests in the other areas too.
Perfect. There's another question. Now that you've gone through the entire early clinical development experience, do you wish you'd experienced something else like late stage development or other areas of clinical development that you may not have experienced in your fellowship?
So that's an interesting question for me, and I think others would either agree or disagree because we all have our opinions, right? But I think for me, early development is really great. One, because the studies they move pretty quick. So in phase 3 studies, depending on when your program starts or where you're assigned to, like you could just be stuck reviewing data for the entirety of your fellowship. And granted, like reviewing like clinical data is great, um, but like you're never gonna like understand what it's like to put together a protocol synopsis, a protocol, and then get alignment from the rest of the like disease area heads, from the line function heads, make sure that everyone buys into it. You're never going to draft those clinical documents. Um, and you're never going to do like that well, I guess you could do vendor management, maybe, but for early phase studies, they just move quicker. You get to do more. Um, and honestly, like just reviewing like graphs and charts for like months at a time is just not my cup of tea. I think that if I got to do like a little bit more, I would say I wanted to do a bit more phase one work because that kind of relates a bit more to what I'm doing now in my current role, which I didn't really have the opportunity to do in my program. But I mean, you're kind of resourced like as the business needs you. So I mean, you don't have a ton of choice, I would say, for the most part.
Excellent, excellent. In terms of your fellowship experience as a whole, what did you find was the most challenging part swapping from fellowship to full time employment?
The most difficult part, honestly, finding the next role. So for me, there wasn't the opportunity to stay on at my sponsor company, and that sucked for one because I kind of wanted to stay, but it also kind of sucked because the market currently is worse than it has been in previous years of fellowship. So it was a little bit more difficult. But in terms of like actual training, like I, my manager says I'm doing good, and I mean I'd like to think that he would tell me if I'm doing bad, but I would say that depending on your program and depending on the work you do, you should be set up pretty well. Um, yeah.
All right, excellent. Do we have any more questions from the audience today? I see a couple people typing. Let's just give them a couple seconds. 3 people typing. Here we go.
Several people. No.
I'll agree with you. The market and the transition from fellowship to full time, in my experience, was certainly quite a bit of a challenge. I know we're both in different functional areas,
Yeah.
but it's been pretty tough for everyone.
Yeah. I mean, that's something to consider too if you're an applicant. Depending on what the market looks like, and I mean, who knows, right? But I mean, in these times, like you'd want to be at a company where you think there's going to be some growth if you
Mm-hmm.
want to stay on, just for like a security sake too.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, we got some questions. Timo asks, was the adaptive study open label, but the data was blinded during IA by an EDC?
What's the adaptive study open label? So there were. And you're going to get me in trouble here, Timo. I'll say that parts of the team were blinded, parts of the team were unblinded. The site was unblinded, and so depending on who you're talking to at the site, they would get confused in email chains and like send data or like unblinding information through emails to blinded team members. But open label at the site level, data blinded to certain team members. And EDC, I see that message. EDC is electronic data capture. So when you think about a clinical study, there's the intervention. People are running the study at the site. What they use to actually record the information is the EDC. Oh wait. Okay. Externally. So let me read this question again. Was the adaptive study of shadows and blinded? It's blinded. I think we're getting in the weeds. I'm not sure I know how to answer this question anymore.
Okay, no problem. We
Yeah.
can move on. We have a question by Christine. What was the hardest part of applying to fellowships in your experience? And there's any advice would you give any advice to yourself if you had the chance to go back in time?
Um, I would say the hardest part for me was like kind of understanding like what my what my motive was. No, but kind of yes. So like there were times when I would be like writing out like what my answers to questions were, and I would just be like, I hate this. And part of it stemmed from me not really knowing what I wanted from the fellowship program and not understanding what it was I'd be getting from it too. So if I could go back, I would tell myself to really think about why I wanted to do the fellowship, what were specific areas of growth that I thought I could really benefit from, and spend more time on those behavioral questions. They're literally the hardest part of like the fellowship process is like the behavioral questions. And you can easily separate yourself from everyone else by having really good answers that aren't generic or like chat GPT fed, but like talk about your general stories and experiences and then make you more relatable to the rest of the team too. Like I remember a story that I told my would-be director where I was like, honestly, like I was really bad about project planning. My very first exam in college, I didn't go to it because I thought it was at a later time because I just memorized all my dates in high school for when things were, and I was like, I can do that in college. And she was like, I did the same thing, and we immediately connected that way. So things like that, like being able to like make yourself seem more like a person, especially in like this virtual environment. Because if you're just like sitting in a dark room on a virtual call, like God help you if you're just not like a great speaker.
Amen to that. We have another question by Howdy related to full-time employment. How many months into the fellowship do you think you should express that you'd like to stay on as a full-time employee?
So this is a funny question. I mean, you should never be it should never be within the first year. It shouldn't be that you want to stay on as an FTE. You should be communicating that you like being there and that these are the things you like about it. These are the things that you like working on. You like working with the people. So within the first year, I wouldn't say that it's about I want to be here as an FTE. It should be about I like working here. Um, I think this is a good fit for me, and like you're, it's not it's not like what you're saying, but it's like how they should feel, like the energy coming from you. I would say it's not saying that you want to stay out as an FTE. Once you hit that year mark, though, clock's ticking. So that's when you should like be really clear with your preceptor and your director, even like, I want to stay on. What does that look like? And either two things are going to happen. Either they are like really honest with you and are like, we think something will be opening up soon. And by soon, I mean like within the next couple of months, and they bring you on early. Or they're going to kind of give you a runaround that's like, oh, well, we'll kind of see, like, we're kind of going to see, like, how the budget's being allocated, what the resourcing looks like, what the headcount is. If they're talking about headcount in like October or November, like, you should be looking for the door, honestly. Because, like, they should know at that point, like, if they have the headcount. Um, and, like, you're not doing yourself any favors by, like, waiting at the windowsill with like your handkerchief for them to offer you a job. Like you should be applying by that point, and you should be doing interviews. So I mean, at that year mark, be very honest that you want to stay. If they ask if you're applying, I mean, tell them yes if you are applying. But I mean, you have to look out for yourself at that point.
I think that's very good advice. Again, going back to the state of today's market, you want those clear signals as much as you are able to collect them. And, in the context of two sort of pathways that you described, if it's not a yes, I myself choose to believe that the answer is no. And so
Yep.
I would definitely agree with you, time to start looking for sure. The nice thing, the 1 year mark, is you've got 12 months to find a new role. Some people get lucky, find something before that. Others, not so much. They end up completing a program and, still find themselves on the job market. So, for everyone listening, I definitely agree with Vader. Always watch out for yourself. Be sure to take care of yourself because you never know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Vader, I want to thank you again. This was really a fantastic presentation. I thought it was super detailed, and the experiences you shared were definitely insightful. We don't have any more questions, so to the audience, thank you so much for attending, and to everyone else, have a good night.
Yeah. See you, everyone.